Tonight on PrimeTime Politics.
We need to continue to do everything we can to ensure the communities are safe.
Moving forward on the Mass Casualty Commission's final report. Nova Scotia's top RCMP officer discusses the call for major changes inside the force.
And I will be like a hawk on behalf of Canadians to make sure that this is happening.
Rogers has approval for its takeover of Shaw, but the federal government has laid out conditions. Our journalist panel weighs in on that and this week's budget. Plus,
this is nothing short of a political prosecution.
Donald Trump indicted. What does this mean for the former president and for Republicans? Journalist Dave Levinthal joins us later. This is PrimeTime Politics. Hello, I'm Andrew Thomson, in for Michael Serapio. We begin with more on the Mass Casualty Commission, its review of how police handled the 2020 massacre in Nova Scotia, and its recommendations for a massive overhaul of the RCMP.
Among our recommendations, we are calling for major changes to RCMP oversight, processes, and culture.
It's imperative that police leaders get on board with making meaningful change and ensuring that they are engaging others in doing so. And so it's not a matter of can they must.
Improving the note-taking, improving the supervision, improving overall openness and transparency in how decisions are made, in direction between advisory bodies, police boards, and so on.
Well, let's talk more about what the commissioners are calling for. Dennis Daley is Assistant RCMP Commissioner and Commanding Officer in Nova Scotia, and he's in Halifax. Assistant Commissioner Daley, thanks for taking the time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to your viewers.
You've now had the Commission's final report for 2 days, and of course, more than half of their recommendations involve the RCMP. What's your top priority in Nova Scotia as you go through the report?
As you know, the RCMP has significantly supported the Independent Mass Casualty Commission. Yesterday was a very somber day. It was my first opportunity to spend time at the venue in Truro. I met with family members, also listened to the three commissioners deliver the public report. For the RCMP, we did not wait for the release of the report to action some change. Here in Nova Scotia specifically, we've added significant resources to our emergency response team. We have robust emergency alerting, public alerting protocols. In Nova Scotia since April of 2020, we have triggered 18 emergency alerts for critical incidences. In addition, we have updated mapping pictometry, which was an issue during the response. We have also rolled out new equipment such as what we refer to as Blue Force tracking, so we can now track our officers outside the police car more readily. It assists in command and control because our commanders now know where each responder is. So when our first responders responded and walked into the nightmare that was Portapic with the fires and multiple things going on at the same time, it was difficult for our commanders to know where our immediate action response teams were. So we've rolled out that sort of equipment as well. As far as top priorities, again, I've started reading the report. I'm going to have to give the report the due diligence, as the commissioner said, to read it appropriately and digest it. I do know the relationship. For me, one of the top priorities is the relationship with our policing partners, and not only our policing partners, but also our partners from community services and other services that we need to be successful. So I've already started that rebuilding and strengthening of the relationships with the Nova Scotia chiefs of police. I'm kind of lucky because this is my third time in Nova Scotia, so I have some pre-existing relationships that I'm able to build on. So I've met collectively with the chiefs of police, met individually with the chiefs of police, and I'm quite confident that the relationship will strengthen. Recognize, I think the Nova Scotia, I think Nova Scotians realize that we are integrated, we train together, and we do operate together. Though I do recognize that the need to strengthen the relationships at the more senior command.
Right, and I do want to ask, because you talked about some of the policies that you put in place recently, and I guess what Nova Scotians and Canadians want to know is are you confident that at this moment that those new policies would make the response substantially different than what happened 3 years ago?
I'm certainly confident of that the response would be significantly different. Even the single edition of emergency alerting now that the RCMP uses and other service providers, other police forces across the country use now is a significant step forward in being able to communicate effectively to the public during a critical incident. So we would have seen last summer at James Smith First Nation in Saskatchewan, where multiple alerts were put out over a period of time. And so, that I am confident just that in and of itself will be of assistance, let alone the other changes. However, I do want to also commit that there is more to do, and we are willing, not only in Nova Scotia, but as an RCMP organization, we are willing to commit to act on all the recommendations.
Right, and the Commission says that the RCMP needs to, in their words, adopt a policy of admitting its mistakes and being more accountable. So when it comes to the mass casualty and the report that's being put out, who is being held accountable for the mistakes that were made?
I certainly myself, recognize that our first responders and the support staff who responded to Portapique did the best they could, given their training and their equipment available at that particular time. However, I do acknowledge as well that there were shortcomings in the response. It is my responsibility as the leader here in Nova Scotia and other police leaders to review the report and act on those recommendations that specifically speak to police around the critical response.
I do want to ask you as well about officer training. The commissioners are calling for a new 3-year model which would replace the RCMP's long-standing training depot in Regina, where there's a 6-month program. What do you think of that idea?
I do think, as the commissioners talked about yesterday, is taking the time to review exactly that recommendation and other recommendations. I think it's too early to comment on the implications of such a decision. I am aware that it was discussed throughout the inquiry, and the suggestion of other countries who may have a system that might be more effective. So I do think it's too early to really comment on how we may move forward on that recommendation.
Well, then let me ask you about the urban-rural divide, because the Mass Casualty Commission did speak of that throughout its report in some of these issues. They want more community orientation, more supervision for officers in rural and remote detachments. How are you going to address that?
Yes, that's a challenge for us. As you know, we do primarily rural policing across the country. What I heard from the commissioners as well that I tuned into yesterday was the urban bias versus the rural bias, for instance. And, it's throughout my service, and I've done significant amount of rural policing, the access to services that assist the police in accomplishing goals can be reduced in the rural areas. And so that's always been a significant issue. For instance, I can recall, the courts asking for probation, and along with anger management, for instance, and the challenge was that the course on anger management wasn't offered, or there wasn't enough participants in order to offer the course in the rural area that I was working in. So that is external to policing, but the idea of community well-being, community safety, and which the commissioners touched on significantly, is an important issue. I'm certainly supportive of anything that provides more public safety, recognizing that the commissioners also said that the police seem to be the default for a lot of different things where we do not hold the expertise. And I think every police leader would agree that we seem to be the default. So I do think we need further conversations. Police need to be part of those conversations as we reimagine what policing may look like.
All right, well, certainly, we could go much deeper into this report, but we do have to leave it there for now. Assistant Commissioner Dennis Daley, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Let's stay on the Mass Casualty Commission and the future of the RCMP. Here to weigh in on that story and more are three journalists and three bureau chiefs here in Ottawa. Bob Fife of the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles of the Toronto Star, and Joanna Smith of the Canadian Press. Tonda, let me start with you. We've seen Thursday's final report pointing to RCMP failings before, during, and after the mass shooting in 2020. What do you make of the reaction we've heard from the RCMP since the report's been out?
I mean, even since the report's been out, the reaction continues to be sort of gobsmacking to me that the force is still not able to acknowledge its mistakes and apologize for the mistakes, instead saying that they did their best at the time and they've made changes since. Well, I think that this report is meant to signal all the other changes that need doing, and they had time to respond to it. They had time to digest it and read it. Even if the interim commissioner or the Nova Scotia chief didn't have time to actually read the thing, somebody should have been reading it overnight and briefing them and had a response that would deal with families' concerns and the public's concerns, and they didn't have that. So failure in communications, and that is more than just PR, that's a failure in policing.
Now, Bob, we've seen a lot of calls for the RCMP to reform itself over the years. That the commissioners themselves even acknowledge that in the report. Why do we think this time is going to be different, or will it be any different this time?
Well, it doesn't look like it's going to be very different when you have families, tears rolling down their cheeks, the emotions of what they went through, and you have the acting deputy commissioner, Michel Duhem, says he hadn't even read the recommendations. I mean, get real. And this is the problem with this force. It is calcified, and somebody needs to really shake it up. This report is very far-reaching and makes a lot of really good recommendations, but it's not as if they haven't had these kind of recommendations before. One of the major problems is we've got to separate the RCMP into a separate FBI-type force, which has been recommended before, and the provincial police, the RCMP that do contract policing, need to be set up in a different format than we have with the RCMP as of right now. It's just too big and it's unmanageable, and people have complained that the detachment commanders in Nova Scotia will say, well, when headquarters calls, well, I report to the provincial attorney general, and when the provincial attorney general has a problem with the RCMP, well, sorry, I report to headquarters. This is the kind of institutional problems at the RCMP, and there's a whole lot of others. I mean, what they talk about, the kind of training that is necessary. Wow, like they're right. 26 weeks of training when they should be doing what the Finnish model, which is 3 years. What kind of, look at the improvement you would have in a police force if that's the case, but money is the issue, right?
Okay, Joanne, let me bring you in here. What do you see in these recommendations that's catching your eye this week?
I think there was some really interesting specific recommendations on what the federal government could do about it. I mean, if we're in a situation where the RCMP cannot be expected to reform itself, there were some key recommendations for Ottawa. One of those was changing the way in the RCMP Act itself, putting more on guard for potential political interference. You remember the scandal last year when it sort of came out that Lucky had maybe let slip in a conversation. She was disappointed that something that she had promised political masters she would do, she was not doing. The report found, no political interference, ill-timed, not the best way to say things, but probably not partisan, but at the same time drawing a clearer line between the public safety minister, the RCP commissioner, maybe even removing in the act itself this part of the oath that says she serves at his direction or whatever it is, would clarify things a little bit. And then on gun control, I found it interesting that they recommended specifically to create an evergreen definition for a semi-automatic weapon, right? That is something Liberals tried to do in the amendment. They did it badly. There was a communications failure on their part. They've withdrawn the amendment, but that's something this inquiry is also recommending.
And it's still not clear if this government is committed to enshrining in law a definition around semi-assault style weapons, semi-automatic assault style weapons. They're struggling with it politically at the committee, so that's a big challenge for the government. You know, but the RCMP and reform of the RCMP has been a long-standing issue, and I'm not sure this government is committed to do that either.
And we're also waiting for a new permanent RCMP commissioner to be named.
This is really, really important. They blew the last commissioner. Brenda Lucky was way out of depth. She was basically a mid-level RCMP officer, was in charge of the training facility in Regina, and moved it into headquarters with no experience in Ottawa, not a lot of depth in terms of criminal investigations either, and she was just out of her depth. If you're going to have real change at the RCMP, they need to have somebody who doesn't meet the check marks that the Trudeau government has, but somebody who can meet check marks that Canadians need is somebody who's going to come in and actually reform the institution.
Okay, let's turn to a major decision affecting consumers that's in the news today, the federal approval of the $26 billion Rogers takeover of Shaw. And I should add, Rogers and Shaw are two of CPAC's founding members. So Shaw-owned Freedom Mobile will be transferred to Videotron as part of the deal. And the industry minister says he's imposed conditions to protect Canadians. I'll get all of you to react in a moment, but let's hear from François-Philippe Champagne.
I want to be clear with everyone that I will ensure that a new fourth national player can go toe-to-toe with the big three and actually drive down prices. These conditions and enforceable commitments should not be taken lightly. If I don't see lower prices in Canada, what I'm saying is that everything will be on the table, and I will then seek further powers in order to achieve that for Canadians.
So, Bobby, you were at this news conference. The industry minister says he's going to watch Rogers and Videotron like a hawk. What's your take?
Well, I mean, they had some pretty important conditions put in there, like they expect to see prices come down about 20%. There are some strong penalties for Videotron if they don't meet their conditions, and of up to $1 billion for Rogers if they don't meet their conditions. So this is in a way has been a change, because we don't normally see government being as strong with the telecoms who have a monopoly. But we've all been here before. We've all heard this before. The proof is in the pudding. Let's see the prices come down, because we'll all be saying, "Hey, Mr. Hawk, you said you were going to bring these things down." And forgive us if we are skeptical of this.
Right, and Joanna, that's been, of course, long-standing criticism here in Canada that we pay some of the highest rates in the world. The Competition Bureau raised this. The NDP is raising this. Other critics are raising this. How do you see this playing out politically for the government as they try to sell this to consumers?
I think it looks like a win for them, and it's sort of one of those, it wasn't a surprise today, but that's because a lot of this is really set into motion in the fall. So when Champagne rejected the original deal, that original deal was already pretty much dead in the water, right? And then he attached conditions that were already in the works. So here we are today. He gets to say, I've imposed, I've got concessions. It's technically true, but I think the proof will be in the pudding. The details of the price limitations, there's wiggle room in there. You can enforce a document, but if the terms are not clear-cut themselves, then lawyers will do their lawyer thing and fight them potentially. The other thing to consider is when you impose financial penalties on a business, makes sense, but a business is always going to decide what's more expensive to me, paying the penalties or implementing these conditions.
And hitting consumers for the penalties.
Yeah, Tonda, what do you think? Because the minister is saying he's got the power to enforce these conditions. He's willing to actually take more action to reduce prices. He's saying he's willing to use whatever legislative or regulatory tool he has in his bag.
Right, and that's unclear. I mean, had they had regulatory tools they could have used earlier, we might have seen them use them, right, on big telecoms to control the prices, consumer prices. But the fact is, no government really wants to be regulating prices and controlling the markets. And I think part of the bet this deal does is hope that in bringing a fourth player in, spreading its market out beyond Quebec into the West, they're hoping that prices generally will come down too. But that's also a wish and a prayer to a certain extent. But I think that it allows, to Joanna's point, it allows the government to make the argument, make the political pitch that they're on the side of consumers and that they're prepared to enforce this with, I think, more than the legislative tool that he's threatening. It's the contract. It's the ability to take the companies to court and to exact a financial penalty. But, you know, like anything, I do think we have to wait and see how that plays out. You know, it will probably be in the life of another government to deal with that.
Right, and we know that affordability was a big part of the budget. The government even promising to target junk fees like telecom roaming charges. And in the few moments we have, I do want to get all of you to give me a sense of this week's budget and really what you see as the political ricochet that might happen from this budget, or maybe there won't be one at all. Bob,
I don't know if we're going to be talking about it next week, are we? I mean,
let me get you to weigh in first. What are your thoughts?
This is a government that likes to spend, and it continues to spend. And, you know, it's in the DNA. And at a time when, you know, they're encouraging people basically to spend more on housing, when the Bank of Canada is trying to dampen the inflationary pressures. But what they've done in terms of encouraging people to buy homes is simply going to spike the housing market. And also all the green technology stuff, you know, you have to be careful with some of that because, you know, it's hard for governments to pick winners and losers. And often what ends up happening is that taxpayers lose a lot of money and people walk away with the money, but they don't have the jobs or the successful businesses that they think are going to come out of it.
Tonda, what's your one big takeaway from what we saw Tuesday?
Well, I think the budget's a combination of wishful thinking, that we're not going to hit a really bad recession, a mild recession only, and big ambition, which is the big play for the clean energy investment. And that depends on how much corporations are really going to invest and take it up based on a tax credit. And will that situate us to compete with the U.S.? I don't know.
Joanna, I'll turn to you. It is interesting. We do have the Prime Minister out selling the dental benefit today, but Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, also doing an 8-city tour while the House is on a break to, I guess, celebrate, I suppose would be the word, his what he believes is his party's accomplishments in getting that dental plan and that GST credit in that budget. What are you looking at in the political debate here?
Yeah, the NDP is pretty happy. Pretty much everything in that confidence and supply deal is in there, save 3 things. 2 of those 3 things are mentioned in the budget. That's the anti-scab legislation and some urban Indigenous housing stuff. I know the NDP thinks not really enough, right? So they sort of see 3 outstanding things. So my question is, next year, what the Liberals going to offer? Like, where does this deal evolve? What needs to come next to keep them on side? The commitment on pharmacare is very vague. The Liberals could say, we've done it. The NDP could say, yes, we agree with you. Or with the same facts before them, the NDP could say, no, you haven't, right? So I think that sort of final step and how people interpret it will be where it goes next.
You could say this budget bought them a year. It's not the budget they're taking into an election campaign.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there for this week at least. Joanna, Tonda, and Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The formal surrender, arrest, and arraignment of Donald Trump is expected next Tuesday. He'll be the first former president to face major criminal charges. Today, Trump's vice president had this reaction.
The unprecedented indictment of a former president of the United States for a campaign finance issue is an outrage. And I think it's clear to the overwhelming majority of the American people that this is nothing short of a political prosecution.
Let's get the latest from Dave Levinthal, the editor-in-chief of Raw Story. He's joining me now. Dave, good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So what do we know about the charges against Mr. Trump and what comes next over the next few days?
So as of this moment, we do not know the specific charges, but what we do know is that they are related to the 2016 Donald Trump first presidency run payment that was made, effectively hush money, to porn star Stormy Daniels. In essence, this is a campaign finance related case, but it's likely to go well beyond that too. It wouldn't be surprising at all if we are talking about multiple counts of business financial forgery, falsified records. There's a lot that prosecutors have looked into, and ultimately when this indictment, now that it has come down, turns into specific charges, don't be surprised if you find any of those things that are ultimately dogging Donald Trump going forward.
Right, so we're waiting some of those legal specifics, but of course this is happening against a big political backdrop, the next presidential campaign. So how is this indictment already playing out within the Republican Party?
Yeah, well, so Donald Trump probably on Tuesday, that could change, but likely on Tuesday, is going to surrender to authorities. He will be booked. He will be photographed. There will be a mugshot. We don't know exactly how this drama is going to play out live on the street, whether Donald Trump will walk in or be inside some sort of dark tinted window vehicle. So it remains to be seen exactly how that's going to play out. But from a political standpoint, Donald Trump is going to continue to run for president. He's going to try to use this, as he has all along, to his great advantage. And at least in the early offing here, his supporters are loving it, saying, bring it. This is a witch hunt. This is something where they're trying to take Donald Trump down, that this is Democrats and liberals and Antifa, use whatever boogeyman you want to. They're saying, Donald Trump supporters, that this is just proof. This is almost final proof that everyone is out to get Donald Trump. So short term, this is going to boost Donald Trump. The question really is, what's going to happen 3 months from now, 6 months from now? This is an indictment. There's a criminal case. A lot's going to change.
Right. Well, we know at least next week our attention will be focused on Manhattan and the former president, Dave Levinthal. Thanks so much for this.
Hey, my pleasure.
And that is this edition of Primetime Politics. I'm Andrew Thomson. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.